Well, hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff, and we've got a different kind of episode for you today. We are in the middle of a little break throughout January and February. We'll be coming in the middle of February, starting the rules of discipline, but we wanted to give you guys some different content. And so today I'm joined by one of my co-hosts, Scott Edburg, and we want to talk about the mysterious and wonderful and popular BCO amendment tracker. We've been sort of piddling with the idea of having Scott sit down and just answer some questions about this for a long time, and we're finally pulling the trigger. Scott, thank you for sitting down and doing this. I know that you probably want to talk for 4 hours or something about this with all the details of spreadsheet formulas and things, but try to tone it down just a little, if you will. Yeah,
I'll try to. I make no promises.
Well, just for because we do this when we interview folks, and it's been a while since we've introduced ourselves on the show. Why don't you just remind people who you are? How'd you get into ministry? What are you doing? Where you serve now? Just kind of give us a foundation, a baseline for where all this BCO stuff kind of comes out of.
Yeah, well, I actually grew up outside of the Reformed faith. I was reared in a nominal Catholic home, and so my call to ministry didn't come in a Presbyterian context. It actually came in a Dutch Reformed context. My family, though we attended our Catholic Mass for Christmas and Easter, we didn't do much more than that. My mom did instill good habits of prayer in my early childhood development, but I came to faith after my parents' divorce. I was like a ship without a sail, no oars to paddle. I felt a sense of loss when I was in middle school. And that loss manifests itself in skateboarding and attending a Dutch Reformed church. It's an interesting combo. But that's how I dealt with the grief of my parents' divorce, was going to Dutch church Bible study and skateboarding, and they wedded themselves together. But when I came to faith, because of all that was going on, perhaps some might question the sovereignty of God and all of that and say, why would God put me through it? It drew me to God, which is perhaps a little different. It made me long for a family that wasn't broken and deterred or destroyed, but a family where I could find true connectionalism with and true belonging. And so I found that in the church. And when I came to faith, I resolved as a sixth grader that I'd go into the ministry. And so it kind of was difficult for me because I had longed since sixth grade to be in the ministry, and it took forever to actually get into the ministry. Yeah, most might seem like it doesn't seem that long, but when you're in sixth grade, you have to get to 12th grade, then you have to complete a bachelor's, then you have to complete a master's. And when I was in my elementary school age, I committed myself to only finishing my high school diploma and then going into a trade. And so when I came to faith, I realized that I extended my sentence for education, and I did so to get a master's in divinity. Never even wanted a bachelor's, but I knew that in order to be a minister, you needed education and schooling and training. And so in that Dutch tradition, I didn't really learn Dutch theology. We learned evangelical theology. And it was only when I was at Moody Bible Institute did I start to learn about Herman Bavinck in 2013 and Louis Berkhoff, and reading them became convicted of Reformed theology. I saw Reformed in my church name, and I decided to invest my time in that section of the library, and it turned me into first a Dutch Calvinist and then a Reformed Presbyterian, who I am today. And so that's kind of perhaps my background. I've been married to my wife for 7 years. We're going on our 8th year, and we have 3 boys, and we've been serving at Providence Presbyterian for 2 years now, and it's been a joy. We've gone through a lot. We're hoping to have our own building here within the next 6 months, and things seem to be going well for us here. We're in Southern Illinois, and so I grew up in Chicagoland, and now we're in Southern Illinois serving, and so that's a little about me and my ministry.
Well, I know that you weren't interested in polity only because I called you one day a couple years ago and said, "Hey, let's do a polity podcast." So, where's the interest come from? Where's the thread of Presbyterian polity in there for you?
Yeah, so I think that's probably incidental in some regards. If I weren't a minister, I'd probably be an engineer. My mind works in systems, and polity for better or worse, is a system of government. And so my mind naturally thinks in systems. And so whenever you give me a system, I like to tinker with it and learn all that I can with it by taking it apart, by rebuilding it, by making it too complicated, and then simplifying it. And so church polity was a natural vehicle for that. How does the church structure itself? Yes, there's a theological underpinning to that, but there's also procedural processes that we implement. And those procedural processes are things that I tend to fixate on. Just ask my elders. My elders they love me and hate me for it because they ask, can we do this? And I say, no, we cannot. That would violate the procedure of the BCO or our standing rules or something like that. And so it's kind of an incidental thing. It kind of has worked its way out. It works its way out in church polity. But I just have a natural desire for structure, whether that be tech structure in my workflow or government structure in our own church. And so it was an incidental stumbling upon. Glad I did, though.
Yeah, me too. So what's the deal with, pretend like somebody doesn't know what the BCO amendment tracker is and kind of just lead us into it and let us know what we're talking about.
Yeah, so the BCO amendment tracker that I created, it was in the midst of the first round of sexuality amendments a few years back. It was created in order to help everyone publicly track the BCO amendments as they went through the presbyteries. It was basically made to the end of actually knowing whether an amendment passed or failed. Before the information would come out so late, it'd be too late to even draft a new amendment if one failed. Actually, it was so bad that typically once an amendment failed, there was never a re-go at it because it was already too late to submit another amendment to try to fix the previous amendment's errors. And then you're 2 years out and everything's dead and you don't even try again. And so it was meant to give up-to-date information to prepare elders and presbyteries to, if necessary, to refine amendments if it failed, but also to give them an update on whether they would pass or not. Everyone during that time in 2019, 2020, and 2021, everyone wanted to know the numbers, and they were just not publicly available. I mean, everyone was asking, how are the amendments doing? That was a common question I heard, and no one knew, at least publicly. And so that was perhaps the problem I was seeking to solve, is just to give everyone what the information they wanted. Everyone wanted the information. It was just not publicly available to anyone. Privately, it was available to certain individuals and groups, but not publicly to the denomination. And so that was kind of perhaps the thought process for why I created it, was to solve that problem.
Yeah, and just to kind of get more into the weeds, what you're talking about is that year in between the General Assembly is when an amendment is alive, right? The GA passes it, and we want to know what the presbyteries are doing with it. Well, unless you have the personal phone number of every stated clerk, all 90 of them or whatever it is now, there was really no way to know, because, I mean, our presbytery doesn't publish anything on the internet. We don't, our minutes aren't available immediately after the meeting. And so you think about how big the PCA is, and after that, there was just no way to keep up. And so there's several different things, I guess, going on here. There's the finding out the information and then publishing the information. So how did that all sort of come to be? Like, maybe talk about your workflow. Like, you just started making contacts, I guess, trying to reach out to people. And I know I got text messages from you back in those days, trying to figure out how to get in touch with our presbytery guys. Yeah. So
you were one of my contacts. I remember, and I don't know if I should say this publicly, but when I first got your information for that first year, your stated cleric randomly emailed me and said, "How did you get this information?" And I said, "I don't know." I didn't want to I said, "I have a contact, but I don't know if I would be comfortable with sharing his information," because it seemed kind of like burdensome, and I didn't want to get you in trouble. So there was a taboo nature. There was a taboo nature when we first started. It seemed that gathering the information wasn't so much controversial. It was the choosing to publicly represent that information that was taboo in the PCA at the time. And I received calls, no death threats, no bomb threats or anything, but I received calls of concern from various guys who I've talked to since then and have no issue with the project anymore. they were just worried about what the perhaps motivations, like was I trying to divide the PCA or destroy the PCA or cause partisan division in the PCA. It was really just publicly publishing data. That was the whole goal. I created it because I emailed a few of my friends at the time, and one, John Bice in my own Presbyterian Providence, asked them just how is it going? How are the tallies going? Are they going to pass, fail? And he just sent me his collection of numbers. And I emailed another guy who sent me another collection of numbers, and they didn't reconcile. And so I was like, okay, there's
same
contradiction.
presbytery. You're saying same presbytery, and they didn't reconcile.
Yeah, they didn't reconcile. And so because they didn't reconcile, I thought, okay, this is just terrible. How are we going to know anything? And so what I did was I took their information and I just put it in a simple spreadsheet. No automation at this point. It was just hard-coded numbers and hard-coded coloring, no conditional formatting or formulas. It was just very low tech. And I compiled all of it and then reached out to where there was variances to men I knew in those presbyteries to correct them. And I created that privately just for myself and for my friends. And when I shared it with some of my friends, they said, "Why would you not share this publicly?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't want to, didn't think to create it for that." And yeah, I gave a few thought on that for over a few days and thought, I'll publish it. But I remember in those early days, I was like, do I publish it anonymously or just put my name to it? Because I didn't know the repercussions. I was actually I just was ordained as a TE. I was barely, in the PCA ecosystem. Remember, I have history in the Dutch Reformed Church, not the PCA. And so Bebo Elkin, actually, when I got my first call, he said, Scott, you have one big problem. You don't know anyone. And you can't get a call in the PCA if you don't know anyone. And so I didn't know if I should put my name to it or not. I decided to, at the end of the day, that transparency would be better than no transparency. And so I think that probably was the better decision anyway. And so, but in the first few days, it was taboo. In that first cycle, it was a taboo thing to do. I think the Band-Aid ripped off. And so it's less controversial now and a lot easier to manage. But
yeah, transparency kind of became the main theme of it, so to speak. Like once those first interactions, I'm sure, got over, why are you doing this? Where are you getting the information? What's your aim and your goal? And once people realized, oh, he just wants the information to be available so we can have the information. Mm-hmm. That really has been the thread the whole time, because I know guys all over the PCA that look at the sheet and have made use of it over the years. You've talked a little bit about the help. I kind of want to dial in there a little bit more, though. So talk a little bit more about the way it would have been before a tracker like this versus the way it is now after. In between those general assemblies, what does a tracker like this make possible, for example, you said earlier, for a failing overture? So an overture is going to fail the presbyteries. What's available now that we didn't have before something like this?
Yeah, so typically in the past, By Faith would run an update or two a season, and the only number no one would know. No one would know the status of an overture, whether it passed or failed, until they got their first round from the clerk's handbook. Unless it was so controversial that By Faith would announce its passage or failure, you would find out whether an amendment passed or failed in the stated clerk's report. And so you'd have to wait to basically 60 days before the assembly to find out where the status of all these amendments. And so what that led to was behind the scenes, different groups, whatever your group was, would track them unofficially. And in that unofficial tally, they would try to, figure out whether they need to put something up or not for an additional round. But it was highly unreliable, and having that many connections in the PCA is not the easiest to maintain. And so before, you would just find out information so late, 60 days out, and you can't do anything to perhaps better the situation, and the church is at a loss. And so before, you were at the mercy of the clerk's office, and it's not all the clerk's office's fault. Sometimes, getting to the regional side of things, presbytery clerks might delay unintentionally submitting their votes. Even more than that, sometimes, there's just communication errors where you send it to a wrong email. You forgot the M and you put an N instead of an M at .com and it never gets sent. All these sort of human errors that can be made. And so information would just be delayed and slow. I think it's gotten better over the years, and perhaps that's what the tracker has encouraged, is perhaps a little more vigilance in that department. But information was delayed, and that delaying, in my opinion, can hurt the church in that some good intentioned amendments may need just a little more refining, and that's what we saw with the sexuality stuff. We just needed to refine it a little, and then it would pass. If we didn't have a public update, then we would have been still trying to pass sexuality amendments or have given up on the whole thing altogether.
Because the 60 days before GA, where we get the clerk's report, is you have to tell me, is too late to turn in a new overture for the BCO?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And so
it might be actually, we might get the clerk's report actually a month in advance. I think it's a month and then 2 weeks. But the 2 months is the deadline for amendments to the Constitution. And so you get your deadline, you receive the update after the deadline. I think that's how it works. And so now you receive the update in basically January. You'll know if an amendment passes or fails instead of finding out in May.
It gives you plenty of time to write another overture or redraft it or whatever somebody might want to do.
At a winter stated meeting, you could get that done.
So I know, I heard about this early on. Those early versions of that document were floating around, but I've never asked you this before. When did it first kind of explode? Because that's one reason we're doing this, is because it became sort of popular. It wasn't just something that like me and you and our friends were passing around. It became something that like my ruling elders who I don't know if they know about my relationship with you, but like they would say, "Hey, have you seen the spreadsheet that's floating around?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, how did you hear about that?" Do you know what happened, or did somebody tweet it or share it or something? I mean,
yeah. So it was kind of real on the ground, grassroots kind of approach. After I decided to make the spreadsheet public, I decided to go on all the avenues in which I could gather information. Information collection was the first important task I had to collect. I had to have a repository of contacts in as many presbyteries as I could. And so the best way to do that would be to go to the Facebook pages for PCA ruling elders and teaching elders. And that's what I did. I said, "Hey guys, I've decided to start a project. I'm collecting information on presbyteries when they vote and the results of that vote. And so if you have any information on this, please give me the dates for that, give me the tallies, you can DM me or whatever." And so I started there. I actually didn't have a Twitter or anything like that. It was just Facebook. And I created Twitter because of the project. I never thought I'd have a Twitter, but here we are. That's all I have now.
Well, we're not here to talk about your regrets in life, are we?
Yeah, it is a regret. Yeah. Dumpster fires. I just love them so much. But that's how I gathered information. And then our friend and co-host Jared Nelson was my other personal contact. And when I had a hole in my data, I said, "Hey, do you have a contact in this location that could perhaps validate something for me?" And he did. And so I worked closely with Jared in those first days, just trying to build up a list of people who I could interact with. And I think through the Facebook groups and things of that nature is kind of how it just naturally started to get shared around. And yeah, it's kind of funny. I was watching, and at the peak, at any given time, there were like 30 to 45 people looking at the spreadsheet. 30 to 45 people.
If only you could have monetized that sheet in Google Docs. I mean,
yeah, I wish I could get the analytics. But Google Sheets at the time had no analytics, and so you couldn't see how many times people clicked to open it. And so I don't know how many people have seen the sheet. I just know the max load was like 45 people all at once. All those anonymous little things in the top corner.
All the little animals. Baboon. Yeah, for real. Man. So what maybe you can talk about what this was like, what it's now, or at the peak. What would it look like for you to maintain it? So you're you've got contacts, you're trying to get information. Did it ever become official information from clerks' offices? Like, how did it work, gathering and then producing? I want to talk a little technically, I suppose, maybe not so technical. We don't want to turn people off, but just the functionality of it, I guess.
The overhead at the beginning was astronomical. It took so much time. Fortunately, it was in the middle of like pandemic stuff where you kind of had some time to the fallout of all that. And so it was a lot of time because of how hard coded the nature was of it. Getting the contacts wasn't too much of a headache. Maintaining those contacts, that's probably still the highest overhead on the project. Is constantly reaching out to 87 people is a lot of work, which is probably why the slowness for the clerk's office to get this information, because there's just a lot of people you have to reach out to. And so the data collection is probably currently the highest workload for the project. But in the beginning, when I was doing it, it was actually maintaining the spreadsheet itself. Right now, it's all automated. All I have to do is enter raw data, and it does everything for me now. But at that time, I was building the spreadsheet as I was collecting data. And so I didn't have the product ready. It was like a beta, as much of a beta of a product you can have. I mean, I was manually changing colors from white to red to green at that time. I had no conditional formatting. And so, I just didn't have the time. There's just so many parts of the project. And so after the lull happened, I was able to redevelop it with my friend Josh Torrey. And I probably know more about Google Sheets and Excel than I probably need to. I'm just in the development and R&D of that spreadsheet. But now everything's automated. I just enter the data, the numbers, like 12 to 20, and it does everything on every sheet. It cycles and pivot tables everything for me, and it's almost no maintenance. It's just getting the numbers plugged in. That's the work now. And so that side of things is really easy. At first, it was the largest headache. Now it's nothing. It's now just maintaining the contacts and having the interest to actually collect the data.
Well, by the way, we'll put you have a link we can share. I'm sure to the current tracker.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have it handy. I know I've got it somewhere. What stands out to you as you look back over the project? I want to talk future in a second, but as you look back over it so far, is there anything that stands out in your mind? I mean, are there any good stories, or what significance do you put to it? I suppose I'm asking you a lot of things in this one question. What comes to mind, I guess?
Let me give a second to collect my thoughts on that. I think perhaps I'm really a nobody. I think that's perhaps the thing you should take away from, if anything, from this interview, is that I am remarkably unexceptional. And this whole project was an interesting lightning that I caught in a bottle. And I would be no different than the average PCA person if it weren't for just this weird thing. I don't view myself extraordinarily gifted in any area. I'm kind of a Renaissance guy. Maybe administratively, I have some natural tendencies and gifting in, but I would be an unremarkable PCATE if it weren't for this weird project. And I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I remember I was talking to Bibo Elkin just a few months ago when I was up for nomination for the admin committee, and he was just surprised by how I was able to get on that committee, given how few people I knew 5 years prior.
Sure, yeah.
And so I think I've juiced the tracker for all it's worth personally.
We here at Polity Matters are trying to squeeze another couple drops out, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the last. You're hitting Rhine. There's no more juice in this thing. But it's an interesting project for like personal work.
Yeah.
My wife often joked with me when I was participating in this. She called me like Icarus, like, Scott, you're flying way too close to the sun, and at one point you're going to fly into it. And somehow I have not flown into the sun, and I'm hoping that I don't. I don't want to burn. But it was an interesting, like, personal career kind of work that I didn't expect. And I don't think anyone could imagine. It's just a spreadsheet. But one of the perhaps one of my favorite early memories was actually Brad asking me to be on Presbycast to like unveil some of the work, and so this is perhaps the bookend to that work. And we talked about the spreadsheet, 3 or 4 years ago, and now we're perhaps at the end of its life cycle in some regards. But yeah, it's been an interesting. What I've enjoyed about the spreadsheet is it's opened the door not merely to like have like influence or credibility or anything, but it's opened the door to create relationships with people who I'd otherwise not know. And I've enjoyed the just getting to know guys, and getting to know Jared Nelson better, getting to know you. I've gotten to know Fred Greco and Brad much closer. Some guys I would not know if it weren't
Hmm.
for this odd project. And so, and even it's not even just like the confessional wing of the PCA. It's throughout the PCA. I have friends that are across the spectrum in the PCA because of this little project. And so it kind of transcends the partisanship, which has brought me joy. I did not want this to be a partisan work. And so having friends on both sides of the aisle helps ground me regularly when in thinking. And so that's probably been the greatest fruit of the labor, is getting to know people and learning where they stand on issues and how they passionately think about them. And so,
Well, maybe let's kick out a little bit and think future. I mean, things have died down a little bit from the sexuality overtures of the last, 5 or 6 years.
mhm.
What do you see as the future of the tracker? And I sort of ask this knowingly, right? I kind of know where you're headed with it, but give people a sense.
Yeah, so the tracker, I alluded to it a moment ago, as we're probably entering the end of the life cycle of the tracker. The Band-Aid has been pulled off as it relates to the taboo nature of maintaining and publicly presenting data. The main goal of the tracker was transparency and accountability. And I think it achieved those ends. And to the betterment of the church, hopefully, we will see the clerk's office and the AC implement some of those ideas, more broadly speaking. And so I think I've been talking with the clerk's office just generally. We're hoping to sunset the project in hopes that they will take it over in their own capacity. And hopefully it'll be perhaps instead of an upgrade or a downgrade, kind of a side grade kind of thing that's more centralized according to our own government. The whole purpose of the project was to fill a hole that was currently lacking. And so if the clerk's office overtakes this, which they have the data to, it's just a matter of presenting the data, then it kind of makes it null and void. If there's an official tracker, there's no reason for an unofficial tracker, unless you need your data to be that up to date. And we'll see. We'll see if they can keep it up to date enough to make it helpful, or if it's going to be too difficult, depending on clerks. So my hope, I guess, for the future of the tracker is to double down in those two fields, transparency and accountability. And I'm hoping as an AC member that I can perhaps invest in those areas. There should be the issue currently with getting data out is the threshold for submitting that data. You need to lower the threshold for communication in order to get the information quickly. And so the higher the threshold, the slower the information drip will be. The lower the threshold, the faster it will be. And so it's kind of like we have a church app. And do I want to sign into the church app to email my elders, or do I just want to text my elders? Well, I'm just going to text them every single time because it's the easiest. And that's the current issue with communication with the clerk's office, is it's not that easy. And it's not really that cumbersome, but if it were, the easier you can streamline things and submitting things, the faster and quicker the data collection will be. And that's why the data for me has been so quick, is because that's just a text message. I just text
Right.
a friend and he texts me back and I have what I need to know. And so that's the lowest barrier. And the closer that the clerk's office can get to that lower threshold, the faster they'll receive data and the quicker they can update their information. And so my hope is that as I sunset this, I can invest my time in that greater idea of transparency and accountability, at least in the committee position that I hold, but also throughout the PCA, other ideas. Because this is not the only place we can be accountable and transparent in. It was one that was helpful given the time, but there are other areas that we could be more forthright in that we're working on.
Have you ever you've ever heard the term Sherlocking something?
No.
Like from a Mac standpoint. So there was a program that you could run on your Macintosh a long time ago called Sherlock, and it was like a big time search function, kind of like Spotlight is now on the Mac.
Mm-hmm.
And Apple basically created the same feature for their computer, and they say they stole Sherlock's kind of app and made it their own without really stealing it. And so now whenever Apple adapts a new piece of software tech, they call it Sherlocking if it puts somebody. So I sort of feel, I mean, I realize there's sort of a passing of a baton maybe going on here, but it does feel a little bit like you're getting Sherlocked willingly, perhaps.
Yes, I
no, it's
want to
good.
be
It's
Sherlock.
good. Yeah, that's right.
I mean, a year ago, I emailed by faith, and I was hoping to start some sort of partnership. It never materialized. It was still too taboo, I think, at the time, and maybe it was a little over a year ago. But my whole goal with this project was to no longer need it, and to pass it along as soon as someone would take it. And I thought the most natural person to take it would not be you or any other TE, but actually the clerk's office itself. And so it's always been my hope that I could offload this to the clerk, give him one more job, I guess. But it's really not, if you have the data, it's just a matter of getting the web UI to present the data. And so they have the data. It's always been my hope to not have this for the next 20 years. It's a little too, it's too much work. And this is why they probably haven't done it on the early side of things, is because it's a decent amount of work. But they have a little more institutional resources than I do or have. And so it's a little less for them. And so I'm happy to offload it. I've been hoping that they would Sherlock me since I started the project.
You raise your kids to leave home, right? It's got to happen. Yeah.
It's got to happen.
Well, do you have any, I don't know the right way to say, do you have any final or closing or parting words as you sort of watch your tracker off in the rearview mirror?
Parting words for a BCO tracker, for a spreadsheet. It's like I gotta take it out back to the back of the barn and shoot it or something. So tell my wife I sent it into
old yeller
old yeller my BCO tracker. Oh man, no, I don't know. I'm happy. I'm happy that I don't have to buy a domain name again. I did that for the last year, and so I'm happy that I could save $20. And a lot of
so the link in the show notes will be good only as long as Scott maintains his domain ownership. Yeah. Presbysheets.com, by the way. I think we figured that out. So
yes.
Well, good. Well, hey, thanks for doing this. Listeners, as your friend and mine, Scott Edburg would say, this podcast is over. Thanks for joining us. If you're interested in learning more, which really is just a matter of going to the actual BCO tracker, the link is in the show notes. You can find those in your podcast player or at politymatters.org. If you've enjoyed the show, consider following us on Twitter or Facebook, supporting us if you'd like to. There's links down below for all of that. If you've got questions or comments, you can contact us at politymattersfeedback@gmail.com. Thank you again for spending time with us. Until next time, Scott, let's say goodbye. And keep in mind, we're saying goodbye to the BCO amendment tracker at the same time.
Sayonara. Don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Oh, that's good.